Some video games are too violent, so violent that they are to the point where they encourage violence in real life. However, most video games do not influence violence on the person playing the game. Depending on the size of their imagination and the exaggeration of these video games or the player's age, it all depends on the person who is playing. So, in theory, most video games do not inflict violence. Honestly, sometimes there are those kids that just don't fear games or think of it as real violence. Instead, they think of it as just a game like they're supposed to. But once, when I was younger, I was playing a somewhat violent video game when Tyler, my younger brother, came into the room. I told him he should leave, but instead he just sat on the floor and kept complaining and saying how he was old enough and he was ready to see it. Although he was not after all, and I got punished for showing Tyler the game. He was mortified. However, he did not resort to violence afterward. In fact, for a while, he wouldn't do anything that actually could get him hurt or possibly. Take 200 children and randomize 100 to watch their parents violently attack one another for an hour a day. However, have the other 100 watch a violent television program for an hour a day, then assess their mental health after a month is over. Ferguson and a colleague of his, Mel Elson, a German researcher, decided to create this thought experiment to determine whether video games inflict violence on children. They discovered, after the research was done, that children understand the difference between real violence and unreal violence. They knew this because the children had different results in mentality and health after both experiments were taken. The children, after that watched their parents attack each other, had been terrified at even the thought of the experiment afterwards. The children who watched the violent television show had pretty much the exact same results as they did before they started the project, therefore proving that video games do not inflict violence. Other researchers decided to study the same argument, including Patrick Markey, a Villanova psychologist, and his colleagues who compared on-screen violence to violence of American murder rates between the years 1960 and 2012. They put down in their published study that movie violence had increased in the past 50 years and gun violence in movies had tripled in the last 27. However, crime rate had decreased by 70% over the past 20 years. But even though these statements of video games that do not inflict or cause actual violence, there are some situations where video games could influence violence. A young child around the age of 7 or 6 could get their hands on a PG-13 rated movie or even R-rated, and they might start playing it. They might become frightened or have mental health issues afterwards, but that's why most video games are played on a more sophisticated device like an Xbox or something related to one, so children who are underage might have trouble getting into one or figuring out how to play it or even start it. Researchers, psychologists, scientists, and etc. have probably all studied this argument at some point. The projects and papers and such that I have read from a few have proven my point to be correct. The amount of violence from video games and versus the amount of violence not from video games is astonishing to see because the violence that people imitate from video games is so much smaller. The amount of children who don't play video games but are violent because of what has possibly happened to them or how they have been treated before versus kids who are violent because of video games. And again, the one with the biggest amount would be the one who has not played video games. So, video games have not influenced enough children to become more violent to the point where they shouldn't be played. Most people know the difference between what is real and what is fake.